So I've been in the TikTok community for 3 years. And in that time, I have made a lot of mutuals, like a lot of friends, a lot of people with similar experiences who share their stories. We've become friends even outside of the app. And in that process, like I have witnessed a lot of people's journeys. A couple of months ago, a friend of mine commented on a video, one of my old videos that I had reposted. And they had said that they were finally ready to share their story about abuse. And I had witnessed this individual move between a couple of relationships, right, over the course of 3 years. And specifically the one, that they were referring to where their partner used a lot of therapy speak and weaponized a lot of therapy speak. And there was absolutely, control and coercion that existed within that relationship. And when this friend shared that they were finally ready to share their story, I actually had this sinking feeling in my gut that was like, oh no, oh no. And it's not because I don't think people should share their story. Absolutely. Sharing your story is 100% a part of healing. It's because of, what I see online and my own experience of sharing my story. I have noticed that when somebody decides to start telling their story, it can move in one of two directions. It can either free you or it can keep you stuck inside of it. I've been posting on TikTok for well over 3 years now. I started posting because of the abusive relationship that I was in. And when I started posting about it, it straight up was just me processing the whole experience and my emotions and everything that I moved through. I remember the very first video that I posted that went viral, and I had gotten so much feedback from people that, oh my God, you just described my experience. I had the exact same thing. And I remember how good it felt. I remember how much relief I felt. And so that kind of drove me to continue sharing my story. Oh, there must be more people that have had these experiences. I need to share them. And I thought I was processing, but what I recognized way later, was that I was actually rehearsing. I was rehearsing. Like every time I went into the story, it was like I found more details and I found more things to pick apart, and I would get more emotionally charged. It was like I would get reactivated every time I told, my personal story with my personal examples. That story became more and more and more about my identity. I remember specifically, like I had run out of things to talk about. I would pick apart every single interaction I had with my ex to try to find the hidden covert abuse tactic. And I would get online and I would share it with everyone. And I would explain why that was abuse. And from the state that I was in, I fully believed that it was abuse. From my current state, and I'll get into this a little bit later, I can see that a lot of what I perceived as covert abuse was actually my own distortions. But I think the key point of what I'm trying to make is every time I would go in to the story and retell the story and retell the experiences, my nervous system got activated again. And neuroscience tells us that the brain doesn't know the difference between what's happening right now in this present moment and what you're reliving from the past. And so it's like every time you go in and you tell that story, you're reactivating your nervous system. Think of it like drawing a line. Like every time you go over top of that line, it gets thicker and thicker and thicker. And that's what you're doing when we retell all of our stories. Right now in my content, you hear me speak a lot about self-referencing and finding self-safety. And because of this perspective that I'm in right now, I have learned that I don't actually need to tell my story in order for it to be valid. My story is valid. My experience is valid, whether or not somebody else agrees. There's a phase where telling your story frees you. And I want to be very clear about that because that matters, right? There's a phase where speaking about what you went through is the very thing that starts your healing because it breaks the silence. These relationships only survive because of the silence, because things don't get acknowledged, because things are minimized, because you end up questioning yourself. And so finally being able to say it out loud and receiving that validation, it is incredibly regulating. Because what was once like internal and confusing and tangled and messy and hard to make sense of, it finally starts to become clear. You're like unraveling all of that. You can name it. You can put language to it. You can say that fucking hurt and that wasn't okay and that impacted me. And doing all of that, you reduce shame. You reduce the feelings of shame because, again, shame thrives in silence. It lives in the things that we don't say. It lives in the things that we keep hidden, that we try to carry alone. And there's so much shame in those types of relationships. So when you speak about it, you're not just telling a story, you're making your experience real. You're validating it. You're allowing yourself to see it. And for a lot of people, that is the first time that this happens. So absolutely, there is a phase where telling your story frees you. But there is also a point, and I don't think people talk about this, where repeating the story actually anchors you in it. And I want to be very careful and very nuanced about speaking about this because I'm not judging. There is zero judgment. And I'm not saying do not speak about your experiences. This is simply an observation of how our system works. Because at a certain point, when the story is repeated over and over and over again, your system stops relating to it as something that happened and it starts organizing around it as something that is. And so at first the story creates space, but over time it creates structure. It becomes the reference point, the way that you understand yourself, the way that you understand your reactions, the way that you understand relationships and the way you understand the world and, relating to people. And so instead of this was something that I experienced, it becomes this is why I am the way I am. This is why I react like this. This is why this keeps happening. And it ends up becoming the lens that you filter everything through. So now you're not just remembering what happened, you're seeing everything through that lens. The way that somebody speaks to you, the way that they pause, the tone, the distance, like absolutely everything gets interpreted through that same frame. When that is what is happening, your nervous system does not register the present moment as neutral. Because inside your system, everything is being interpreted. Everything is being assigned meaning. So if the lens is this behavior isn't safe, this is going to hurt me, this means something about me, that is what your body is going to respond to. Not what is actually happening in this present moment, but the meaning that you have assigned to, to these things. So then your system ends up staying braced. It stays hypervigilant. It continues to scan. It's looking for confirmation. It's looking for patterns. It's looking for, is this happening again? And I want to be clear, it's not because there's something wrong with you, but because this is how your system learned to stay safe, right? This is what I need to watch for. This is what I need to protect myself against. So even if the environment changed, even if the people are different, even if the dynamic isn't actually the same, your body can still respond to it like it is. And when your system is in that state, it doesn't rest. It doesn't settle. It doesn't experience safety because it's still organizing around what happened instead of what is here and now. And this is how the story keeps living in the body, not because it's still happening, but because the meaning is being applied. So again, both are true. There's a phase where telling your story frees you, and then there's a point where repeating it anchors you back into it. So this is where the real question comes from. Because if it has been years and you've done your healing and you understand what happened and you still feel the impulse to share your story, then we have to ask something a little bit deeper. And again, no judgment. I'm not saying don't share your story. I'm saying get honest about what is driving it underneath. Because when something is still being repeated, there is usually a reason your system is returning to it. So maybe it's a desire to be witnessed, right? Not in the way where you weren't seen before, but in the way where being seen still does something for you. It still lands somewhere. It still fills a void inside of you. Maybe it's about securing moral clarity, referencing that was wrong, I was right, this is what happened. And again, all of that can be valid. But if you still need to return to that, then there's something that your system hasn't fully settled. Maybe it's needing other people to agree. Maybe you still need the validation and the confirmation and the yes, I see it too, because the agreement creates safety. It stabilizes the experience you had. Sometimes, and this is an even more subtle one, it's a reorientation around the other person. So even though they might not be a part of your life anymore, your energy is still moving in relation to them. It's still referencing them. It's still defining yourself in contrast to them, which means you're still organizing your lens around that dynamic. And it's really hard to see because it looks like growth. It looks like empowerment. It looks like self-awareness. It can also look like helping, but underneath it, your identity can be organized around the wound. And I think the simplest way to be able to start seeing that is feeling the need to tell. If there's a pull, if there's a compulsion, if there's I have to say this, or people need to understand this, I need to explain this again, right? There's something there. And I've felt that pull so many times. When I first learned about, the matrix of conditioning and social conditioning and patriarchy and all of the systems of oppression, like I got on my platform and I screamed it to the fucking rooftops. And when people weren't listening to me, I got really pissed off, right? And I kept returning to it and I kept repeating it. So there was urgency and there was charge and there was like a need to share the information. What I've learned and what I've experienced, when you're actually free from the experience, you can absolutely share your story. You can talk about it. You can teach from it. You can reference it, but you don't need to keep returning to it. There is no urgency. There is no charge. There is no sense that something is unresolved if you don't say it, because you're not being pulled back into it. You're choosing when to reference it. And that is a completely different energy to move from. So the question is never, should I not talk about my story? The question is, what is driving me to keep coming back to it? Because the answer will tell you whether you're expressing something that is complete or you're still organizing yourself around something that isn't. Now, this next part is important, and I want to be really intentional about how I say it, because none of what I'm about to say excuses harm. Harm is still harm. What you experienced matters. Boundaries matter. Leaving matters. Nothing about this conversation is minimizing impact or telling you to stay in something that hurts you. There's something that I've started to see that has shifted how I related to these experiences. Not everything is as calculated as we make it. And I know that that can feel really confronting, especially if you've been hurt, especially if you've been in coercive or abusive relationships. It can feel very targeted, right? Those relationships feel very personal. It feels like you were chosen, you were vetted. They pick certain type of people. They chose to treat you that way. They chose to do what they did. And I mean, sometimes there is intention, but a lot of the time, what we're actually looking at in these relationships is unconscious behavior. People who are dysregulated, people who don't have awareness, people who are operating from their own patterns, their own conditioning, their own nervous system responses. And so instead of this being a fully calculated, intentional dynamic, it's often patterns meeting patterns. Two people, both operating from learned responses, both trying to feel safe, both reacting, defending, protecting. It's just showing up in different ways. And again, this doesn't make it okay. It doesn't mean you tolerate it. It doesn't mean that you stay. But it changes how you reference it. It changes how you organize around it. Because the more we frame everything as intentional and calculated, the more we stay oriented around it. We keep trying to understand it. We keep trying to make sense of it. We keep trying to resolve it. We keep trying to protect ourselves from it. And in doing that, we're still referencing it. We're still organizing around it. We're still locating the source of our experience outside of ourself. And it becomes other focused. Why they did that, what they were thinking. How could they act like that? And again, those questions make sense in the beginning, but they also keep your attention outside of you. And sometimes what's actually happening is much simpler and harder to accept. And that's two dysregulated systems, both pointing at each other, both trying to locate the problem outside of themselves. And when you can see that, it doesn't invalidate your experience, but it does give you your power back, because now the focus isn't on decoding them. It's on understanding what's happening inside of you, what you're responding to, what you're organized around, what your system learned to expect. And that is where things actually start to shift. Now, I want to zoom out for a minute and I want to talk about something bigger. Because there is a phase where community is everything, where when you've gone through something painful, when you're trying to make sense of it, when you're trying to come out of the confusion and the isolation and, being around people who understand it is incredibly stabilizing. It reduces those feelings of isolation. It reduces the shame. It gives you language. You feel less alone, right? And it helps you see that what you experienced was real, that it mattered, that you weren't imagining it, and all of that matters. This is, for a lot of people, the first place where they feel fully seen. Support is meant to stabilize you. It is not meant to become your identity. If you're still in the same conversations years later, if you're still engaging with the same narratives and the same dynamics and the same framing, you have to ask yourself, what am I actually integrating? Because healing isn't just about understanding. It's about something actually changing inside of you in how you relate to yourself and how you relate to other people and how you move through the world. And if the environment you're in is constantly reinforcing the same lens, then there's a point where it stops supporting you and it's actually holding you in that place. And this is the part that's harder to look at, because those spaces don't just provide support. They provide belonging. They provide regulation. They provide validation. And like a lot of them provide moral alignment, right? Again, this was wrong. That was right. But again, that's black and white, all or nothing thinking. But these spaces also reinforce identity. They keep the narrative active, and they can become a place where the story is rehearsed and refined and repeated, where there's subtle comparison. Who had it worse? Who understands it more? Who sees it more clearly? Like in these spaces, agreement and outrage feel good. They're validating, right? And again, there's no judgment because it all makes sense. It's a space where your system is finding safety and connection, right? It feels very stabilizing. But again, if your belonging is built around what hurts you, you will unconsciously protect the hurt. Because to move beyond the hurt would mean risking the thing that gave you connection, the thing that gave you understanding, the thing that gave you a place to belong. And it doesn't mean that you need to leave those spaces immediately. It doesn't mean that those spaces are bad. Those spaces are very good, right? But it does mean you start to notice your relationship to them. Are these spaces actually helping you integrate, or are they keeping you oriented around the same experience? Because there's a difference between being supported while you're moving through something and staying in a space that requires you to continue referencing it. And I think that's where the deeper shift happens, where we're not rejecting community, but we're no longer needing the community to hold our identity. And I think that's when you know that something has actually integrated. This is where the identity shift becomes really important, because there's a huge difference between this happened to me and this is who I am. When something happens to you, it is an experience. It is something you lived through. It impacted you. It shaped you. It mattered, right? But it's not who you are. A lot of healing spaces ask, why did this happen? What was the dynamic? What were the patterns? What does this mean? And that has a place. But recognition work, which is the work that I do, it asks a different question. It asks, what part of me is still organizing around this? Because you can understand something completely and still be structured by it. Like you can have clarity and language and awareness and still be moving from the same place internally. So the question becomes less about the event and more about your relationship to it. Is this something I experienced, or is this something I am continuing to organize myself around? Because if your identity is organized around what they did, they are still the center of your nervous system. Your system is still oriented around it. It's still referencing it. It's still using that experience to decide and to interpret and to respond. This is where my lens has really shifted, because I do understand that there are different stages of healing. There's a phase where you need to understand what happened to you. You need the language, you need the context, you need to be able to see, the dynamic clearly. But what I've come to see is that if the content you're consuming is other referenced, it doesn't actually help you move out of your patterns, because the need to understand the other person, why they did it, how they think, what their patterns are, that's not neutral. It's your system trying to protect you. It's your system trying to create safety by predicting and analyzing and making sense of something outside of you. So on the surface, it looks like awareness, right? Sometimes it even sounds like insight, but you're still organizing yourself around something external. And that's why people can consume so much content. They can learn the terms, they can understand the dynamics, they can explain everything perfectly and still find themselves in the same patterns. They're still activated, they're still over explaining, they're still trying to manage what somebody else thinks, feels, or does, because the orientation underneath didn't actually shift. It's focused on the other person. And I think you can really tell the difference between people who are speaking from that activated, unintegrated state, and people who are speaking from integration, right? People who speak from integration, there's no emotional charge driving it. There's no urgency. It's not coming from a place that needs something. And you can feel the difference. Like one is really activated and repetitive and charged. Like it's trying to land and it's trying to convince you. And it's trying to resolve something that has energy behind it. But the other one feels really settled. It feels clear and complete. And like it's not trying to pull you in. It's just there. It's just truth that sits without needing anything from you. So for me, it's not about whether something is true or accurate about the other person. It's about, does this content bring me back to myself, or does it keep me organized around somebody else? Because if it's not self-referencing, it's going to feel really helpful. It's going to feel really validating, but it doesn't break the pattern. So I'm not here to tell anybody not to share their story. That's not the point. The point of this conversation. What I am inviting you to do is to look at why you feel compelled to, like what's driving it now, where you are today. Is it service? Is it coming from a place of clarity? Can you offer something without needing anything back? Is it sovereignty? Are you choosing to share not because you're being pulled to, but because it's aligned? Or is it survival? Is there something in your system that needs to be seen, that needs to be validated, that needs to be understood? Is there a part of you organizing around that experience in a way that's keeping it active? And again, there's no judgment. It's okay if that is where you are. We are simply bringing awareness to it. Because at some point, growth requires outgrowing the room that held you when you were stabilizing. And that doesn't mean that the room was wrong. It doesn't mean that it didn't serve you. It just means that you're no longer the version of you that needed it. And if you've done years of healing and you still feel stuck, this is the work I teach. Not more processing, not more understanding, but recognition. What is my system organizing around?